He heard it, of course. What? Nothing, she said. It's just oddly coordinated. He clicked his speed up another notch. Can't have that. Show off. Guilty. The hour slid by faster than she expected. When she stepped off, he handed her a cool bottle of water. Their fingers met. He didn't move away immediately. His eyes dropped to her mouth for half a heartbeat, so quick she might have imagined it, then returned to hers, as if nothing had happened. Late afternoon brought a delivery. Clara opened the door to find a florist's assistant holding a white box. Inside were cinnamon rolls, still warm, the sugar glaze shining. A small card lay on top. For Eli's first morning back. Test batch tonight. She stared at the words until they blurred, then closed the box gently. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon for the next hour. When she finally found Sebastian again, this time in the study, she hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to thank him in person or send a message. He looked up. Well, they're excellent, she said, lying only a little. She hadn't tasted them yet. He'll love them. Good, he said, returning to his screen. But as she turned to go, he added, there's milk in the back of the refrigerator. The good kind. She laughed. The good kind? You'll know it when you taste it. Twilight stretched across the windows, the city switching from day to night like a man flipping a switch. Clara took her tea to the balcony and leaned against the railing, the distant sound of traffic threading through the quiet. She told herself the crossing paths were just that, paths in a shared space. She told herself his timing was incidental, his touches accidental, his questions practical. Yet when she went back inside, Sebastian was there in the hallway, as if he'd been waiting for her to reappear, though he said nothing to suggest he had. He simply fell in step beside her, walking toward the kitchen where she had left the box of cinnamon rolls. Try one, he said, opening the box. Purely for research. She took a bite. Sweet, warm, a hint of spice that lingered. She closed her eyes a fraction longer than necessary. When she opened them, he was watching her, not with the cool curiosity she recognized from their first days, but with something that had taken root behind his gaze, steady and intent. Well, he asked. She swallowed. He'll love them, she said again, voice softer now. Good, Sebastian murmured. And this time the word carried more than approval. It sounded like a quiet promise he had made to himself. The evening settled. The home felt a shade less impersonal, and every place she turned, she found evidence of a pattern she couldn't deny. Hallways, timed perfectly, doors opening just as she reached them, his voice arriving precisely when silence had grown too loud. Excuses, she told herself. Intent. Her pulse answered. The morning started with the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. Clara stirred, reaching for it with a groggy hand. A flood of notifications lit the screen. Messages from an old friend, missed, calls from an unfamiliar number, and a text from Sebastian's assistant. You should see this before he does. Clara sat up, heart kicking. She tapped the link in the message, and the screen filled with the bold black letters of a gossip site headline. CEO's wife caught with mystery man. Sparks trouble in paradise. Below it, a grainy photograph. She recognized the moment instantly. Noah hugging her goodbye outside the gala's valet entrance. The flash of a camera must have caught them mid-embrace, her hand resting lightly on his back. Out of context, it looked intimate. Too intimate. Her pulse rushed in her ears. Noah was an old friend, practically family, someone who'd once sat at her mother's kitchen table, eating burnt pancakes, and teasing her for always overcooking eggs. But that history meant nothing to strangers with an appetite for scandal. The article dripped with speculation, calling her mysterious, private, and an unlikely match for New York's most eligible bachelor. The last paragraph suggested Sebastian's silence at the gala after-party was telling. She shoved the phone aside and swung her legs over the bed. This was nothing, she told herself. He'd understand. He had to. Except Sebastian wasn't the kind of man who trusted easily. She'd seen it in the way he studied people, the way his jaw tightened when others got too close. The sound of the penthouse elevator sliding open made her skin prickle. She slipped into a loose sweater and headed for the living room. Sebastian was already there, standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows. His phone was in his hand, the screen dark now, but his expression told her he'd seen the same headline. Sebastian, she began. He turned. His face was unreadable, but the sharpness in his eyes cut through the distance between them. Who is he? Her throat tightened. A friend. His name is Noah. I've known him since. I didn't ask for his resume. His voice was calm, but there was an edge under it, like a blade hidden beneath smooth cloth. Why were you with him, outside the gala? Alone. In the dark. The framing made her bristle, because we were catching up for the first time in years. He was leaving, and we hugged. That's all. Do you realize what this looks like? Yes, she said, heat rising in her voice. I saw the photo. But you, of all people, should know better than to trust what tabloids make up. He took a slow step forward, eyes fixed on hers. And you, of all people, should know the cost of careless appearances. We made an agreement, Clara. No scandals, no distractions. Something in her snapped. I'm not a distraction, Sebastian, and I'm not going to live my life afraid that smiling at someone will ruin your precious image. His jaw clenched, and for a moment he didn't reply. The silence between them thickened, carrying more than just the weight of a headline. The space between them tightened, as if the room had shrunk. Clara folded her arms, more to steady her voice than to protect herself. You keep saying we made an agreement. It feels more like you made rules and expected me to live inside them. Sebastian's reply was quiet. The quiet that made people lean in. Those rules keep wolves from the door. I'm not the one feeding them. She shot back. A hug from an old friend isn't treason. His eyes flicked to her mouth and back. It's not the hug. It's what it gives people permission to say. They don't care who he is. They care that you're close to him, and not to me. She laughed once, humorless. Close to you? You hired me to be a solution, not a partner. A muscle moved in his jaw. I hired you to protect both of us by keeping me on a leash. She stepped toward him. Tell me the part where I'm allowed to be human. His voice dropped, roughened. Be human all you want. Be careless, and you take a torch to everything I've built. The words hit hard. She felt anger coil hot and tight in her chest. Everything you've built includes me now. That means you don't get to talk to me like I'm a risk on a spreadsheet. He took another step, close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble along his cheek. Then stop acting like one. Stop treating me like one, she said, each word clear. Noah is a friend. He always has been. He held me when my mother was sick and I didn't know how to breathe. He hugged me goodbye outside a fancy party. That's the story. If you can't trust me with that, what are we doing? Silence stretched for a beat. Something in his face shifted. Less anger, more ache. But he didn't retreat. Trust is expensive, he said finally. I learned That early? I'm not asking for a blank check, Clara said, softer now. I'm asking for the courtesy you give strangers. He stared at her, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she saw the storm under his restraint. Courtesy. He echoed. Is that what you want from me? What I want, she said, throat tight, is for you to believe me when I tell you there's nothing to that photo. What I want is for you to look at me the way you looked at me at the gala and admit it wasn't just pretend. His breath left him in a slow exhale. The set of his shoulders changed. You noticed? How could I not? Her voice was barely above a whisper. You watched me. Like I mattered. He moved then. Not a lunge, not a plan, just forward, until there was no safe distance left. You do, he said, the words low, as if pulled out of him. That's the problem. Then stop treating me like a headline, waiting to happen. Stop giving them an opening, he returned. But the fight had thinned, leaving something raw. His gaze dropped again, lingered, rose. She swallowed. If you're going to accuse me, say it. If you're going to trust me, do that. But don't stand here and... Her sentence broke when his hand lifted, fingers brushing a stray curl behind her ear. The touch was barely there, and somehow everything. Her breath hitched. Sebastian. He stopped, as if the sound of his name had pulled him back to the edge. Tell me to step away, he said, voice rough. Say it. And I will. She didn't. The admission hung between them, like heat. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to turn away. She didn't. The first touch of his mouth was restrained, almost careful, the kind of kiss that asks a question. She answered by rising onto her toes, her hands lifting to his shoulders, fingers curling in the fabric of his t-shirt. The kiss deepened, not hungry, not yet, but deliberate, like a truth they had both been circling. His hand slid to the small of her back, drawing her closer. The scent of him filled her head, clean, faintly warm from sleep, lost to worry. She felt the moment he let go of a fraction of control. The kiss shifted, slow turning to, sure, restraint giving way to something that tasted like relief and possession at once. Clara broke for air first, a shaky breath against his cheek. There's nothing with Noah, she said, the words brushing his skin. I know, he murmured, and the admission landed in her chest like a bell. He kissed her again, slower this time, as if to seal what he'd just said. The second kiss ended with his forehead resting against hers. His heartbeat thudded steady through his chest, matching the pace of her own. For a sliver of time, the world outside the glass walls disappeared. There were no cameras, no headlines, no rules, only the fact of his hands anchoring her and the quiet certainty that she had wanted this more than she'd let herself admit. Then, as quickly as he'd allowed himself to fall into it, Sebastian pulled back. The loss of his touch sent cool air across the place. His palm had warmed at her spine. Her brows knit. Sebastian? He stepped away another pace, gathering control like a coat he'd dropped. The distance returned to his eyes. But now, it looked like armor hastily refitted. Not indifference. I have calls, he said, voice even again. We'll revisit the media issue. After my 11. That's it. Her laugh was disbelieving, soft and wounded at the edges. You kiss me like that, and walk out. His throat worked. If I stay, I won't be reasonable. Maybe reasonable isn't what we need, she said. The words out before she could second-guess them. He closed his eyes a heartbeat, then opened them. Decision set. Not like this. Not when I'm angry. He reached for his phone on the console, fingers steady now. Eat something. Don't read comments. I'll be back this afternoon. Sebastian. He was already moving toward the elevator. At the doors, he stopped without turning. I believe you, he said. Quiet, but clear. That should have been the first thing I said. The doors opened. He stepped inside and was gone. Clara stood alone in the living room, the view sprawling and bright and meaningless. Her lips still felt warm, her chest light and heavy at once. The headline on her phone waited where she'd left it, but the words had lost their power. Something far more complicated had taken their place. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, closed her eyes, and steadied herself with a slow breath. If this was how trust started for a man like him, reluctant, clumsy, real, then it would never be tidy. It would be earned, argued for, then tested again. Across the glass, the city kept moving. Inside, a single truth pulsed through the quiet. This was no longer just an arrangement, no matter what either of them called it, when the world was listening. The storm rolled in before dusk, low clouds pressing against the windows like a tide. Wind rattled the balcony furniture. Far below, the streets thinned as traffic hurried through sheets of rain. Clara stood at the glass with a mug of tea and tried not to check her phone for new articles. She'd already read enough. Sebastian returned just after 7, hair damp at the temples, coat dark with rain. He set his keys in the tray and glanced at her with that quiet assessment she'd begun to read. Not suspicion, not anymore. Something closer to concern. Any headlines I need to kill? He asked, shrugging out of the coat. Your team's already smothered the worst of it, she said. Mrs. Weatherby called to say the board is advising calm. Clara used the same crisp tone Mrs. Weatherby did, when something awful was being politely ignored. It made him huff a brief laugh. Lightning cracked over the river, a staggered flash that bleached the room white. A beat later, the lights blinked. They steadied. On the second strike, the penthouse went dark. The silence that followed felt sudden, like a held breath. The screens died. The air system stilled. Outside, the city still glowed, but up here, everything paused. Sebastian moved first. Backup should kick, he began, stopping as nothing hummed to life. Of course, the generator's in maintenance tonight. He reached for his phone, thumbed the flashlight on, and handed it to Clara. Stay here. I'll check the breaker. She followed anyway. The utility panel sat in a closet off the service hallway. He tested switches, waited, tested again. Nothing. When he straightened, the beam lit his jawline, the tiny scar beneath his ear, the focus in his eyes. Whole. Building? She asked. Most likely. So, candles? Her voice tilted light, inviting him to accept the simple fix there was. He stared at her for a beat, then nodded. Candles. They found a drawer, lined with column candles and tea lights, unused, as if someone had once planned a dinner party and never held it. Clara arranged a cluster on the kitchen island, while Sebastian set a few in glass cylinders along the living room shelves. The first match flared, then settled to a gentle flame. Warm circles of light spread across marble and glass, softening the edges of the room. The view outside pulsed with lightning. Inside, the glow felt almost old-fashioned. Refrigerator stays closed, he said, half to himself, as if reciting a checklist. She smiled. You're very good at emergencies. I prefer them on my schedule. He leaned a shoulder against the island and watched her lower another candle into a holder. Hungry? Always, she said, and his mouth tilted. He pulled a cutting board from the cabinet and opened the pantry by phone light like a man solving a puzzle. Within minutes, he'd set out crackers, olives, a jar of roasted peppers, a wedge of cheese, and, because, he noticed the way her face had changed each time she saw them. Cinnamon rolls under a glass dome, field rationing, deluxe edition, he said, passing her a napkin. They ate standing at the island, close enough that she could feel the warmth of the candle nearest his hand. Wind knocked against the building. Rain traced quick patterns down the glass. Somewhere, on a lower floor, someone laughed through an open balcony door. The moment felt suspended from the speed of the day. "Thank you for this morning," she said quietly. "For believing." "You?" he asked. "For saying it out loud," she corrected. "It mattered." He held her gaze for a long second. Noted. The word had a different temperature now, less clinical, more promise. Another crack of lightning. Farther away this time. The darkness inside didn't change. The quiet did. It settled into something easier. Clara blew out a slow breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Dragged a finger through a trail of sugar on her plate like a child. He noticed everything. "Come on," he said. "If we're stuck without power, we might as well sit somewhere less like an airport lounge." They moved to the living area. The candles he'd placed along the shelves flickered in small, steady halos. The city's glow beyond the glass made a second horizon. He folded himself into the corner of the sofa. She took the opposite end, pulling her legs up, toes tucked beneath the hem of her sweater. For a moment, they said nothing. The world had narrowed to rain and light and the quiet knowledge that they were choosing to stay in the same space when they could as easily have retreated to separate rooms. "Tell me something true," he said. "Not the version you give strangers. Yours." She looked at the candle nearest her, watched wax pool and set. "All right," she said, "but you first." He inclined his head. "Fair." Sebastian rested his forearms on his knees, fingers laced, face turned toward the flicker. Without the usual hum of machines, his voice seemed to carry differently, lower, more intimate, as if the room itself had leaned closer to listen. "I was 8 the first time I figured out I was a photo op," he said, almost conversationally. "My father's company had just secured a contract. There was a celebration. I was dressed like a miniature version of him. People shook my hand and told me I was lucky. I thought so too. Later that night, I said, knocked over a glass. It shattered. I apologized to my mother. She made me apologize to him." He smiled for the staff. "Told them everything was fine. Then in private told me I should be grateful to be there at all." He paused. The candle flame nudged a shadow across his cheek. "As an adult, I told myself I liked clean lines and quiet rooms because they meant focus. Truth is, mess meant punishment, and quiet meant I could hear trouble coming." Clara's breath eased out slowly. "That's why you hate surprises," she said softly. "I don't hate them." His mouth twitched. "I preempt them." She smiled, despite the ache in her chest. "That sounds accurate." He angled his head, studying her. "Your turn." Clara tucked a curl behind her ear and let her shoulders drop, an invitation to her own truth. "My father left when I was 12. He didn't say goodbye. He just stopped coming home. My mother got 3 jobs. I got 2. The day I turned 16, I learned how to read a pharmacy receipt and a hospital bill in the same afternoon. He didn't look away. He didn't rush her either. Eli was 10, she continued. He used to pretend he wasn't hungry, so I would eat the last piece of toast. When his health started to slide, I told him we were fine, that I had a plan. I didn't Not really. I had shifts. I had a calendar, the wall, and an alarm that woke me up at 4 so I could mop a diner floor before school. Romance belonged to people with a safety net. We had each other and a rent notice stuck under the door some months. The wind pressed a longer sigh against the glass. Sebastian leaned back, but his attention stayed locked on her. "You carried more than anyone should," he said. I didn't see it that way. It was just life. You make lists, you cross things off, you sleep when you can. I got good at being useful, being wanted. She caught herself, then nodded to show she meant to say it. "Wasn't something I expected." He was quiet for a long beat. "I want you," he said, steady as a statement of fact. It wasn't a line. It was the truth dropped with care between them. Heat rose in her cheeks. It wasn't embarrassment so much as recognition. "You want me to be what?" "Convenient. Presentable." His expression shifted. "Seen," he said. "Safe. Close." She heard the last word as clearly as if he'd touched her. "Close how?" The question came out softer than she intended. "In all the ways that terrify me," he returned, and the honesty of it felt like a door opening. Silence settled again, but not empty. It was full of things neither had said aloud until now. She curled her toes under the blanket. She'd pulled from the sofa back and watched. The candle threw tiny arcs of light across his wrist as he turned it. Lightning cracked farther still. The rain softened a shade. Somewhere in the building, a baby woke and cried. Somewhere else, a dog barked twice and quieted. The world carried on. Here, in a room that had finally learned how to hold warmth, the past felt named, if not healed. "What do you do?" she asked quietly, "when the thing you want is also the thing you're not sure you know how to handle?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was almost a whisper. "You tell the truth. You ask for patience. You learn." She nodded. "Fair. Your turn," he said again, but not as a challenge, as an invitation. She held his gaze. Something else. True. He inclined his head. "I've never let anyone close in that way," she said, the words steady now, because she had decided they would be. "Not because I'm afraid of intimacy, because I couldn't afford the aftermath if it went wrong. My life has been a balance beam for too long. One wrong step, and someone I love pays." The room didn't shift, but something inside her did. She had said it. She had handed him the reason, without apology. He didn't freeze. He didn't make a joke to dodge the weight of it. He simply listened. "Thank you," he said. And somehow, the two words reached farther than any speech. Candles burned lower. Wax crept toward glass rims. Clara drew her knees closer. Blanket curved around her shins. "People tend to think never is about innocence," she said. "For me, it was logistics and choice." "Choice," he echoed. "I had offers," she admitted, and laughed once at her own phrasing. "Not glamorous ones, kind ones. A boy from my apartment building who fixed his aunt's car and wanted to take me to a matinee. A chef from the diner who slipped extra pancakes on my plate after a double shift. But it was always at the edge of another crisis. I couldn't promise anyone their place in my life when even my sleep schedule had to be negotiated with someone else's medication." She pressed the blanket edge between her fingers. "I learned to say no, and mean it, because maybe turned into guilt too easily, and I told myself I'd choose when I felt safe, not from fear or chaos. I didn't want my firsts to be about escape." He didn't move, but the space between them changed. "You saved them for the right person," he said. "Not as a claim, as respect." "I saved them for the right moment," she corrected gently. "The person matters, of course. But I also wanted to look back and know I chose, that it wasn't a reaction to bad news or a last night in a leased apartment." Her mouth tilted. "Turns out, you can be practical about your heart, too." He exhaled a small breath, amused and undone at once. "You would find a way." She looked at him. "And you? What about me?" "You talk about control like a shield," she said. "Is it also a habit you don't know how to put down?" His eyes didn't leave hers. "Yes. What happens if you put it down?" He considered. "I risk needing something I can't manage, and if you don't, I risk missing it entirely," he said. His voice made the choice sound simple. It wasn't. That was the point. She shifted, turning to face him fully, one leg tucked beneath her. "Sebastian." He mirrored the movement without thinking, knees angling toward hers. "Clara, I don't want to be a rule you made," she said, "or a solution you bought. I want to be someone you meet in the middle. I don't want to keep you at the edge of my life," he replied, almost before she finished. "I want you inside it." The words landed with the solidity of a decision. Wind softened. The candles dipped a little lower. He reached across the space separating them, not to claim, but to offer. His hand hovered open between them. She watched it for a breath, and then laid her hand in his. Warmth traveled up her arm. His thumb traced once along the base of her fingers, a touch so careful it felt like a vow. "Tell me if I'm moving too fast," he said. "Tell me if I'm moving too slow. Tell me anything, as long as it's real." She smiled. "Deal." He stood, drawing her up with him. The blanket slid to the sofa. They stood in the glow of a dozen small flames, faces close enough that she could see the change in his eyes. When she said, "I want you too," his breath hitched. It wasn't a sound she could have identified in his boardroom voice. It belonged here, in candlelight, with rain easing beyond the glass, and the world temporarily pushed to the edges of the frame. "Clara," he said, the name low, like a promise. "Sebastian," she answered, steady. He didn't rush forward. He closed the distance, the way a careful man does, when he has decided to be brave, measured, attentive, unwilling to risk misunderstanding. When his mouth met hers, the kiss was soft at first, an echo of the morning's heat, but without anger knotted under it. He tilted his head, giving her room to step in or step back. She stepped in. The kiss deepened, not sudden, not careless, surer than before. His hand came to rest at her waist. Hers rose to the line of his jaw. The scruff there rasped lightly against her fingertips, grounding her in a moment that felt both new and long overdue. "Tell me," he murmured when they parted a fraction. "I'm here," she said. "I want this." He didn't need more than that. She could see it in the way his shoulders released a tension he carried like second nature. He kissed her again, slower, and the room seemed to fold around the two of them, smaller and warmer with each breath. They moved together through the candlelight, learning each other's rhythms without hurry. He was and warmer with each breath. They moved together through the candlelight, learning each other's rhythms without hurry. He was careful with every touch, offering, never assuming, his questions asked in the brush of his hand along her arm, in the pause before his lips found her throat, in the way he waited for the slightest nod before taking the next step. She answered with her own language, the soft catch of breath when he cupped her face, the way her fingers sought his wrist, as if to anchor him closer, the quiet yes that left no doubt. "Tell me if anything feels wrong," he said. "It doesn't," she answered, a small laugh in the word because nothing had felt this right in longer than she could remember. He lifted her gently, and the sofa became a place too narrow for what the moment was turning into. They crossed the room as a single thought, his hand steady at her back, hers splayed over his heart. In the doorway to the bedroom, she paused, only to look at him, to see if the man who had taught himself to survive control would also learn how to surrender to care. He did. He unlearned a little with each inch, with each breath, with each time he waited for her to nod before he let himself want. The candles from the living room cast soft gold into the hallway. The storm's voice dwindled to a hush that set the pace, slow and sure. She touched his face, traced the small scar at his hairline, mapped the features she had once studied from a distance. "I'm choosing," she whispered, because naming it mattered. "Me too," he said, the words rough but clear. Clothes became another kind of silence between them, the kind you let fall when words do more harm than good. He kept speaking anyway, in the care of his hands, in the patience of each kiss, in the way he stopped, each time, to check the truth in her eyes. She answered, without ambiguity. No performance, no posing, just agreement, repeated, in all the small ways that count. When it finally changed, when closeness turned into closeness of a different order, she closed her eyes, not to hide, but to feel it fully. There was a tenderness to his control now, repurposed, shaped to protect rather than to hold back. He listened for every shift in her breath, adjusted to every sound, learned her reactions, like a language he had always wanted to speak. She guided him when she needed to, unafraid to ask, unafraid to receive. Time lost its edges. The storm outside moved farther down the river. The candles in the other room burned into small cups of light. He pressed his forehead to hers, their noses brushing in a kiss that wasn't about wanting at all, but about recognition. About seeing the person in front of you and being seen back. "I've got you," he said. "I know," she breathed. What followed belonged to them. It wasn't cinematic or rehearsed. It was better for its honest shape. Two people trying, learning, choosing. The steadiness of him, where she needed steadiness. The softness of her, where he had forgotten softness existed. They met in the middle, the way she had asked. He returned to it whenever he drifted too far toward old habits. When it was done, when the room held only their breathing and the slow, quiet that comes after, they didn't reach for speech right away. He gathered her in, pulled the blanket up, made a cradle of his shoulder and chest. She tucked closer, one leg crossing his, hand finding the thud of his pulse. The world still had headlines and rivals and board members with opinions. None of them were here. The electricity returned with a sudden click somewhere down the hall. The lights in the bedroom stayed off. Neither moved. The candles would gutter out on their own. Morning would be busy. There would be consequences. And, across all of it, the question of what this meant now that it had been claimed with intention. Clara lifted her head and looked at him. At the man who had promised to be reasonable and discovered something better than reason. "Are you all right?" she asked. The same words she'd used after the gala, after the kiss. He smiled. That rare, unguarded curve she had learned to love. "I don't think all right covers it." She laughed under her breath and settled again. "Good." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Sleep," he said. We'll handle the rest when the sun's up. Together, she said. Together, he confirmed. The rain loosened its hold on the city. In the dark room, watched only by a line of faint candlelight from the hall, they finally slept. No contracts in the bed with them, no rules except the ones they chose. The storm had forced the lights out. The night had done the rest. Morning arrived like a quiet apology from the sky. Clean light, clear streets, the last drops of rain clinging to the balcony rail. Clara woke to the calm weight of an arm around her waist and the steady lift of Sebastian's breathing against her back. For a few seconds, she kept her eyes closed, memorizing the feel of safety in a space that had never felt like hers until now. He stirred. The arm tightened, just a fraction, as if testing whether she would slip away. She didn't. "Good morning," he said, voice low with sleep. She turned, tucked closer, and let the shy smile come. "Good morning." No speeches followed, no labels. Just a long moment where their foreheads touched and the room held them gently. Eventually she stretched, kissed his jaw, and sat up, pulling the blanket with her. "I'm making coffee," she said, pushing hair behind her ear. "Come claim your share before I drink it all." He smiled. An actual smile, loose and unguarded, the kind that softened the hard lines at his mouth. Threat noted. They dressed without ceremony. Her in a soft tee and joggers, him in a Henley and dark lounge pants. The penthouse felt different as they crossed it. Not smaller, exactly, but less like a display room, and more like a place where life could happen without asking permission. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle and reached for mugs. He moved beside her to grind beans, near enough that their shoulders bumped once, twice, making both of them laugh under their breath. The normalcy of it, quiet footsteps, clink of ceramic, the first curl of steam, stitched the night to the morning. He slid a plate toward her. "You have two choices, responsible breakfast or leftover bakery diplomacy." Under a glass dome, one cinnamon roll waited, haloed by glaze. She feigned deep consideration. "Diplomacy, please." He warmed it, tore it in half, and passed her the better piece without pretending not to. They ate at the island, knees almost touching on the stools. Every so often their eyes met. Every time, the glance held a new ease. "Last night," he began, then stopped. As if the sentence had too many doors, she spared him the maze. No regrets. Relief flickered through him so quickly she might have missed it if she hadn't been looking. "Good." "Neither do I." Her phone vibrated. A message from the hospital, routine update, stable vitals, medication adjusted. She exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders in a visible wave. "Good news?" he asked. She nodded, showing him the screen. Better dosage. He slept through the storm. "Thank God," he said, and meant it. A second buzz, this one from his assistant, flashed on his wrist device. Reminder, 10:30 board prep, 11 strategy session. He silenced it. Later. "You have a full day," she said, not as a warning, more as a reality check. "I have a flexible one," he countered, stirring his coffee. "We're fully operational again. I can attend by video." "You hate video," she said, amused. "I dislike wasted motion," he corrected, tipping his mug toward her in a mock toast. Different thing. They finished breakfast with the kind of small talk that mattered more for its tone than its content. Whether the gym needed softer towels, whether the housekeeper liked the new supplier, whether the balcony herbs survived the wind. Domestic Details. He took exactly one note on his phone. Towels. And Clara had the absurd, wonderful thought that he would actually fix it. When she stood to rinse the mugs, he reached over her shoulder and took them, fingers brushing the inside of her wrist. She felt the spark of recognition again. This man could be exacting and still gentle, could be demanding and still listen. "I'll clean," he said. "You cooked," she replied. "Let me." "You negotiated a peace treaty with breakfast," he said, meaning the part where she'd declared no regrets. "I can handle a sink." She laughed, surrendered the mugs, and turned to lean on the counter. The city outside glittered in the washed light. Inside, something steady took root between them, a promise they hadn't spoken, but both felt. He angled toward her, one hand braced on the counter by her hip, close, without crowding. "Clara," she hummed in answer. If anything about last night felt rushed, "Tell me," he said. "I'll hear it." It didn't, she said, and added, because truth deserved clarity, it felt chosen. His gaze warmed. He bent, pressed a slow kiss to her temple, and returned to the sink before the moment could become ceremonial. The elevator chimed softly in the hallway. Delivery of the morning papers. Sebastian ignored it. Another buzz landed on his wrist. He ignored that, too. She noticed. "Of course. You're going to be late." "I'm aware." His tone was mild, almost playful. "Tragic." "Sebastian." He dried his hands, wiped the counter, and claimed the stool beside her again. "Stay home today," he said, as if the thought had just occurred to him, even though the suggestion clearly carried weight. "Rest. Read. I'll clear the schedule where it can be cleared." "Is this you being protective or possessive?" she asked, only half teasing. He met her question head on. "Both," he said. "I'm working on refining the healthy versions." She held his gaze. "Okay. But if you start treating me like a glass ornament, I'm staging a mutiny." "Duly warned." Her phone lit once more with a message from her old friend. Just a line. "Here if you need me." She glanced at it and tucked the phone face down, neutral as a coin. Sebastian didn't ask. He lifted his coffee instead, as if trust were a muscle he meant to exercise without spectacle. "Walk with me later?" he asked. "Rooftop. No cameras." She smiled. "I'd like that." They sat a minute longer, doing nothing, letting the quiet be comfortable. The room held their silence, the way a good book holds a thumb between pages, ready to return, not afraid to pause. When at last she slid from the stool, her hand passed near his shoulder. He caught it and pressed a kiss to her knuckles before letting go. "Go shower," he said. "I'll set up in the study." "You mean pretend to work within hearing distance?" she said. He looked properly offended. "I plan to be extremely productive, while remaining within a 30-foot radius of you." She rolled her eyes, warm all over. "Try not to miss your very important meetings." "I'll send my regrets," he said, and the faint smile that chased the words told her he meant to do exactly that. By 9:40, the study lights were on, the door open, and Sebastian's laptop arrayed with 3 tidy windows, financials, agenda, and a video call grid waiting for participants. A calendar alert pulsed in the corner. He clicked it away and typed a short message to his assistant. "Reschedule 10:30. Power issues. Prioritize the afternoon." She replied, understood within seconds, followed by board chair, asks if everything's okay. He sent back, "Everything is fine." Clara walked past the door, hair damp, wearing soft denim and an oversized cardigan that fell off one shoulder. He tracked her in his periphery, the way a hawk tracks movement on the ground. Silent, precise, certain. She caught him and smiled without stopping. He pretended to refocus on the spreadsheet and failed convincingly. He opened a blank note and wrote without thinking, order softer towels, call hospital at noon, ask Clara about garden box for balcony, find recipe for cinnamon rolls that freeze well. He deleted the last line, then rewrote it, then left it there. At 10:30, his assistant pinged. We can start without you and loop you in at the vote. He typed proceed and muted his device. The room hummed with nothing. He realized only then how used he'd grown to noise. Meetings, calls, the constant tempo of decision. Today, the quiet felt earned. Clara settled at the dining table with a half stack of paperwork, glasses perched low, on her nose, as she cross-checked discharge instructions against insurance forms. Every few minutes, she paused and sipped water. Every few minutes, he looked up, because he could. A news link arrived from PR. Coverage still circulating. New angles trying to ignite. He thumbed it open, skimmed, and felt his jaw tighten. Wife embraces unidentified man at gala exit. Insiders wonder if contract is coming apart. He could call the editor, threaten access, demand a correction. Moves he had used like tools since he was 25. None of those tactics sounded right in the room where she sat, backlit by the pale morning, nibbling a corner of toast while doing the kind of work that keeps a life from slipping through cracks. He forwarded the link to PR with a single instruction. Ignore. Do not amplify. They replied, surprised but obedient. Copy that. He stood, stretched, and walked out to the table. Status. On hold, she said, tapping a form, waiting for a call back from the case manager. I think we can push for home therapy twice a week, instead of once. We'll get it, he said. If they deny it, I'll underwrite a private plan until insurance catches up. She searched his face. You don't have to fix everything. I know, he said, and almost smiled. I get to choose which things I try to fix. Her phone lit with a text. She glanced, typed a quick reply. All good. Thank you. He did not ask to whom. Trust. Again. It didn't mean the protective ache under his ribs softened. It meant he stood it. Hungry? He asked. Always. She echoed from earlier. He disappeared for 5 minutes and returned with a small plate, sliced apple, almond butter, 2 squares of dark chocolate. He set it by her elbow as if offering a strategy. She looked up at him, and the look was everything breakfast had been, with a little more gravity. He tried to walk back to the study, and only made it as far as the door before turning to watch her take the first bite. She caught him. He didn't even pretend to be sheepish. At 11, the board call began without him. His screen flashed with a notification. Vote moved to 3. Chair asks, if you will attend then. He typed yes, knowing he might change his mind again. Sebastian, she called, not looking up from the paperwork. Do you want my opinion on something? Always, he said, moving to stand behind her chair. She slid a printed vendor list toward him. Your events team keeps picking the same 3 caterers. They're safe. They're also forgettable. If you want guests to talk about more than cocktails, find a chef who cooks like they're telling a story. He leaned down to read the names from her angle, close enough for her hair to brush his jaw. Recommend 1. I don't know any chefs in your circle, she said, but there's a small kitchen 2 blocks from the hospital. The owner cooks for recovering families twice a week. Simple food, thoughtful. The kind that tastes like someone remembered your name. He wrote it down. No hesitation. Done. The next half hour passed in companionable silence. He typed a few emails, flagged a line in a contract, sent a text to security about media access in the lobby. Every time she left the room to grab a file or refill her glass, he felt an odd hitch in his breathing. Each time she reappeared, the knot eased. It wasn't possessiveness, in the cheap sense. It was recognition. He had spent years keeping the world exactly as close as he could control, and now that someone had walked inside his carefully drawn lines, his body was learning a new pattern. Measure the space by her nearness. He tried to hide it. He did not try very hard. Around noon, she closed the folder and stretched, soft sigh leaving her lips. Victory, she announced. Forms complete. For now. Reward, he replied, already dialing the elevator for a lunch delivery he'd arranged an hour earlier. Soup, from that kitchen you described. I guessed correctly, I hope. She blinked. You've already. Preventative maintenance, he said, echoing the joke from yesterday, and received the exact smile he'd hoped for. They ate on the balcony, sweaters on, city bright. He asked her what Eli would want in a room at home. She asked him why there were no photographs on his shelves. He said he'd never had anything he wanted to see that often. She said that was changing. When a calendar alert popped again, board pre-brief in 30, he silenced it a second time. She watched him do it. You're really not going, she said, equal parts touched and exasperated. He considered the truth and gave it to her without spin. I'd rather be here. That can't be good governance, she said softly. That can be tomorrow's problem, he returned, then added, because he was learning, I'll call the chair after lunch and own it. Thank you, she said, which meant, thank you for choosing me without pretending you didn't. He collected the bowls, set them in the sink, and braced his hands on the counter, head bowed for a few seconds. When he looked up, she was leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, amusement written all over her face. What? He asked. You're terrible at pretending to work. I'm excellent at it, he said. I simply prefer more interesting company. She pushed off the frame and walked toward him. He watched every step like a man counting blessings. When she reached him, she slid her hands into his Henley, palms flat against his chest, and felt the thrum there answer her own. Careful, he said, voice a shade rougher. I have a 3 o'clock. You did, she corrected. Now you have a walk on the roof with me. Tragic, he said again, smiling. He shut the laptop, sent one clean message to his assistant. I'm off grid for the next hour. Tell the chair I'll make it up to him with dinner and data. And set the phone face down. As they stepped into the hallway, he realized something simple and startling. He hadn't taken a full breath since she left the study 10 minutes earlier. The air felt easier now, with her hand in his. It wasn't dependence. It was clarity. He had spent years convincing himself that needing no one made him strong. Today, in the soft gravity of a day he'd chosen to spend within reach of her, strength looked like the courage to stay where he could feel. They reached the private stairwell to the roof. He opened the door and let her pass first, a small courtesy that felt like a ritual. Sun flared on the landing, bright and clean. He followed, close enough to catch the faint scent of her shampoo, close enough that, for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a set of battles to win. It felt like a life to build, one choice at a time, beginning with this one. Stay near. The email arrived mid-afternoon, folded inside a polite note from Sebastian's assistant. Forwarding. For your review. External outreach. L. Clara opened it. A crisp header. Royce Foundation. The message was brief, almost disarmingly so. Mrs. Knight, your voice at the hospital benefit moved our donors. We're launching a city-wide program for families managing long-term care. I'd value your input and hope you'll consider serving as a community advisor. If you're open, I can meet tomorrow at 2 p.m., Hotel Marlowe Lounge. Kellen Royce. She read it twice. Royce. She knew the name. Articles mentioned him. Whenever Sebastian's company announced a win, different tone, different philosophy. Where Sebastian favored steady execution, Kellen preferred splash. Clara glanced toward the study. Sebastian had left the door ajar, laptop open, jacket on the chair. He was on a call, voice low. She set the phone face down. This wasn't a request to model gowns or pose for magazines. It sounded like work that mattered, streamlining paperwork, closing gaps between discharge and at-home care, finding families who kept falling through. She wrote back a single line, happy to hear more. 2 p.m. is fine. When she looked up, Sebastian stood in the doorway. He had a gift for arriving without footsteps when his mind was occupied. His gaze slipped to the phone, then returned to her face. News? He asked. An invitation, she said, from the Royce Foundation. They want help on a family care project. His expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes cooled a degree. Which project? She passed him the message. He read it once, thumb resting against his jaw. You answered? I said I'd hear him out. She weighed each word. It's what I've been talking about. Making systems humane. He handed the phone back. I know what it is. She waited for the rest. Kellen doesn't make offers without a camera in his pocket, Sebastian said, voice even. He'll want a headline, and a reason to mention our marriage in the same breath as his donation. Clara's first instinct was to defend her own judgment. The second was to look past the warning and ask what he wasn't saying. Is this about optics, she asked, or is this about you and him? Both, he said, not pretending otherwise. He's tried to peel allies away from me for years. If he can't buy them, he baits them. This isn't a board seat, she said, patient. It's a family care program. His eyes softened at the word family, then steadied. You can help families without being framed by his banner. I can also show up and ask questions that matter, she replied, matching his calm. If the program is real, we'll see it. If it's window dressing, we'll see that too. A beat of quiet. He wasn't used to losing a room. She wasn't trying to win one. They simply stood, the two of them, weighing the cost of a meeting against the value of the work. All right, Sebastian said at last. Go. But you're not going alone. She lifted her brows. You're coming to a lounge at 2 in the afternoon? I'll be invisible, he said, which was charming and untrue. And if he wants a photo, he can take one of my back as we leave. Clara let a smile curve. So, noted. He didn't smile in return. He stepped close, thumb skimming her knuckles once. If at any point you want out, say the word. I will, she said, and meant it. The Hotel Marlowe Lounge smelled faintly of citrus and old wood. Afternoon light pooled across leather chairs and quiet tables. Kellen Royce stood as they approached, tall, tailored, a navy suit that said taste without risk. He extended a hand to Clara with the easy confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Mrs. Knight, he said warmly, thank you for making time. Clara is good, she replied, taking the seat opposite. Sebastian chose the chair beside her, not across, close enough to signal that conversations about her included her, and that conversations around her included him. Kellen clocked the seating with a quick flick of his gaze and smiled wider. "I'll be direct," Kellen began. "We've been studying what happens after the discharge paperwork is signed. Families are exhausted. The first 2 weeks at home are chaos. We want to pair each family with a navigator, someone who translates systems, schedules deliveries, arranges meals, checks on siblings." Clara nodded slowly. "That would have saved us months. That's why I asked to meet you," he said. "Sincere on the surface and smooth under it. You understand the ground level. I can fund a staff. I can fund training. I can't fake what you know." "What exactly are you asking?" Sebastian said, polite to the point of cool. "Advisory. Public-facing when it helps," Kellen replied. "A few site visits a month. Listening sessions. I'd like you to be the program's first voice in the community." He slid a brief proposal across the table. Clara skimmed budget columns, hiring plan, projected outcomes. Someone had done real homework. She flipped to the back. In a box labeled Visibility, a line, Founding Advisor, Clara Knight. Next to it, Joint announcement with Knight Global. Optional, but ideal. She let the page lie open and met Kellen's eyes. "If this is about families, the announcement should be about families," she said. "Not my last name." Kellen raised his palms. Gracious. "Understood. But public trust matters. Your story builds trust." "My story is not a product," she said gently. "It's a context. I'll lend it where it helps, not where it sells." Kellen's smile didn't falter. "Fair. What would make this useful in your view?" "Simple things done well," she said. "A hotline that answers. A checklist that's not written like a tax form. A driver who knows how to carry a wheelchair. And clear guardrails. Money that goes to services, not glossy flyers." He listened, nodding, jotting a note or two. "You'd be good at this," he said. Admiration warm, and, she suspected, strategic. "Families will trust you because you lived it." Clara felt Sebastian's glance, a soft weight at her cheek. She didn't need the reminder. She knew the line between help and being used as a headline. "What's your timeline?" she asked. "Pilot next month," Kellen said. "Full rollout in the summer." Sebastian spoke then, crisp. "You're moving unusually fast." "We've been building in the background," Kellen said. "This meeting is about the last 10%. The human layer. The human layer comes first," Sebastian returned, not rising, just stating. "And it isn't your last 10%. It's half the project." Kellen's eyes flickered. "Agreed," he said smoothly, as if that had been his point. Clara closed the packet. "I'll give you feedback by Friday," she said. "If I advise, it will be on clear terms." "Of course," Kellen said. "I'll have my team draft an outline." She stood. Both men stood with her. Kellen offered his hand again. "Clara, thank you, Mr. Royce," she said, shaking it. His palm was cool. The grip lingered a shade longer than necessary. Friendly. Just enough to register in a photographer's lens. Sebastian shifted a half-step closer, and the contact ended. As they walked out, Kellen added in an almost casual tone, "There's a gala in 3 weeks. Pediatric wing endowment. You'd be our ideal keynote. We'll review the invitation, Sebastian said, the "we" shaped like a shield. Kellen's smile lived in his mouth, not his eyes. I look forward to your reply. Back in the car, Clara watched the city pass in glass reflections and thought about lists, deliveries, alarms, forms with too many boxes. She could already see how a navigator would help a grandmother translate instructions, or a single father find a ramp that arrived on time. That part was simple. The rest wasn't. He's courting headlines, Sebastian said, reading her silence as well as any page. He's courting outcomes too, she countered. Both can be true. I don't want your name in his press kit. It didn't have to be, she said, reminding him. Kind, not sharp. I told him so. He drummed his fingers once on his knee, caught himself, and stilled. I'll fund a separate program through our foundation. You can build it without his logo. Maybe we can do both, she said. Pilot with him. Measure what works. Then expand here with clean lines. He turned to her. You trust him? I don't, she said. I trust the need. That's different. He absorbed that, then nodded. Half acceptance, half stubbornness. If you advise, I'm present. She smiled. You were present today, and I will be again, he said, unblinking. Every session, every site visit. Sebastian, non-negotiable, he said, voice gentle, tone firm. If he wants to build something worthwhile, he can do it in the light. I'll make sure the light stays on. She considered arguing, and decided not to. It wasn't about ownership. It was about the math of risk he carried in his bones. He had learned early how quickly people traded kindness for advantage. If showing up kept her from being boxed into a narrative, she would take the extra chair at the table. Fine, she said, but if you hover, I'm assigning you to carry boxes. He looked genuinely relieved. I'm good at boxes, and smiling at donors who tell long stories. I can train for that, he said dryly, and reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers, in a way that felt less like claim and more like agreement. They spent the evening drafting a list of terms for any role she took, transparent budgets, a family advisory, board with real authority, the option to publish findings whether or not they were flattering. At the bottom, she wrote one more item, no joint press for optics. She underlined it. He nodded. The next week turned into a parade of rooms. Listening sessions in a church basement and a community center with scuffed floors. A round table at a clinic where nurses offered the best ideas in 10-word bursts between patients. At every stop, Kellen appeared. Well-prepared, watchful, impossibly polite. At every stop, Sebastian stood or sat within arm's reach of Clara, not looming, not loud, simply there. People noticed. Of course, some whispered and pointed, then smiled when Sebastian rolled up his sleeves to load cases of nutritional shakes into a van. Others approached Clara directly, ignoring the billion-dollar shadow beside her, and told her how they'd taught themselves to sleep, sitting up on hard chairs next to hospital beds. She wrote everything down. When Kellen suggested a photo on the church steps, Sebastian stepped back, angled himself out of frame, and pretended to check his phone. Clara leaned into the group. Families, volunteers, a social worker with tired eyes, and let the shutter click. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about them. It was about the people squeezed into the middle of the shot who had a right to be centered for once. Sebastian started rearranging his calendar in ways that would have alarmed his staff 3 months ago. He skipped a lunch with 2 financiers to sit on a metal folding chair while A grandmother explained how to get a stubborn oxygen machine to behave. He sent his CFO to a dinner in his place and carried cartons of diapers down a narrow stairwell while Clara took notes about pharmacy hours that made no sense. He didn't speak much during the sessions. When he did, it was to ask a practical question, the kind that moved a conversation forward without stealing the focus. Mostly he watched Clara's posture as she listened, the way she slowed her pen so a teenager could finish a sentence, the moment her throat worked when a father said, "We're tired, but we don't quit." He had thought obsession would look like chasing. It turned out to look like presence. Kellen noticed that too. After one meeting at the clinic, he drew Clara aside, motion gentle. "You're extraordinary at this," he said. "Our program will live or die by whether we can bottle what you do in a room." "You can't bottle it," she said, smiling a fraction. "You can hire for empathy, train for follow-through, and create space for people to tell the truth." He nodded, practiced humility playing across his features. "You and I think alike. On outcomes, maybe," she allowed. "And on storytelling," he pressed. "If people see your face beside this work, they'll give. With your permission, I'd like to announce your advisory role next week." Before she could answer, Sebastian stepped in. Not abrupt, just there. "You'll announce the pilot," he said. "You'll list the services, the hotline, the staffing plan. If Clara's name appears at all, it will be in the acknowledgements, alongside the nurses and family reps who built it." Kellen's smile thinned at the edges. "I respect your position," he said, which meant he disliked it. "It isn't my position," Sebastian replied. "It's the right one." Clara touched Sebastian's wrist, a small reminder that victory wasn't the goal, integrity was. She turned back to Kellen. "Send me the draft. I'll mark it up." "Of course," Kellen said, acceptance smooth as glass. On the ride home, Sebastian stared out at the river, jaw set. Clara leaned her head against the window and let the city slip by. "You didn't have to come to all of them," she said, half teasing. "I did," he answered, plain. "When you're in rooms that matter, I want to be the person carrying water bottles and taking calls in the hall. So you don't have to." She laughed quietly. "You hate being in halls." "I don't mind when the room on the other side contains you." She turned her hand, palm up on the seat between them. He fit his into it. The contact calmed, something restless in him, the same way it had the first time she fell asleep on his shoulder in a car. He didn't name it. He simply kept holding on. Back at the penthouse, an envelope waited. No logo, thick paper, a single glossy photo inside, Clara and Sebastian on the courthouse steps weeks ago, rain in the air. His umbrella tipped over both their heads. A neat line, hand-written at the bottom. Public stories always start somewhere. Let's write the next chapter well. Care. Clara read it and felt her chest tighten. Not fear, not flattery, a warning wrapped in charm. She handed it to Sebastian. He took one look, then slid the photo back into the envelope and set it aside. "We'll keep the focus where it belongs," he said. "On the work, on the people, on us, on our terms." Clara reached for his hand again. "On our terms," she agreed. The next morning, he showed up to her earlier stop with coffee and a plain grey tea, no entourage, no tie. When the coordinator asked if he was there to observe, he shook his head and held up a roll of tape. "Point me to a box," he said. Clara watched him. This man, who once treated affection like a risk, now learning how to stand next to her without swallowing the space. He hadn't just refused the rival's framing, he had chosen a better one. Show up. Carry. Wait. Let the work speak. She smiled and handed him a clipboard. Welcome to the team, she said, and meant every word. Clara first noticed it at the clinic on Halstead. She'd slipped into the hallway after a listening circle to speak with a mother who couldn't stay because her parking meter was ticking. They were halfway through a plan for meal deliveries when a man in a dark jacket positioned himself between Clara and the exit. He was discreet, courteous, and very much there. Security. Hired by Sebastian. New faces each day. Same formation. At the next session, a driver waited at the curb, even though she'd said she'd walk. Later, she learned her calendar had been mirrored to his. Her afternoon coffee with Wren at the bookstore somehow became a chauffeured stop with a guard lingering by the display of cookbooks. None of it was loud. It was precise. Is this really necessary? She asked on the ride home. Voice even. Sebastian's gaze moved from her hands to the city outside. Yesterday, a photographer tried to follow you into a clinic restroom, he said. Today, a blogger called the hospital, pretending to be a relative to get Eli's chart. I won't give them an inch. She didn't argue the incidents. She pushed at the edges. I can ask for help when I need it. I'm not waiting for you to be cornered, he said. I'm making sure you aren't. At the penthouse, the mail tray held another envelope with clean handwriting. A clipped article about the pilot program and a note. Great work, deserves support. Let's talk scale. No signature. This time. She slid it under a stack of recipes and told herself it wasn't a message worth her pulse. The evening moved quietly. They ate simple pasta. He told a dry story about a supplier who tried to bill him for fog machines at a sober luncheon. She laughed. He lit up at the sound. Later, while she answered emails at the dining table, she saw, nearly hidden in a shared folder, a file labeled Field Movements, a grid of her upcoming stops with color-coded coverage. Heat rose under her skin. She closed the laptop. Sebastian, she said. Steady. He looked up from his phone. Yes, we need to talk. He heard the tone. He set the phone face down. All right. She gestured toward the study, not wanting to stage the conversation where they ate. He followed, shoulders squared. The part of him that negotiated with governments snapping to attention. The door remained open, by her choice. She stood with her back to the window. The city was a cool sheet of light behind her. He stood in the lamplight, patient, waiting for terms. Start, he said softly. She took a breath. What you're doing might keep cameras away. It's also tightening a ring around my life. His eyes didn't flinch. My job is to remove threats. You've made my work a threat to manage, she said. That's the problem. Her fingers curled around the back of a chair. You're not protecting me. You're caging me. The words landed between them with the clarity of glass on stone. He didn't rush to deny it. He lifted his chin a fraction, as if bracing for weather. One line changed everything. One call raised the stakes. Click. Part 2 now. And subscribe so you don't miss what unfolds next.